Hey, everybody, it's Dan. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Lance Reisland and Tim Bielik are going to join me here shortly. We are doing another draft pod. If you missed our big boards, they did dueling big boards last week. This week, we're doing what's called a My Guys draft. And I explained it a little bit right off the top, but it's basically them pounding the table, 5 guys each, for who they would love to see the Cleveland Browns take anywhere over the 7 rounds of the NFL draft. So that's coming up on another draft edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Find us on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. This would be a good episode to watch on YouTube. If you haven't tried it yet, there's a little graphic. I put the list of the draft list as we're going along so you can kind of keep up with what they're saying. Again, that's Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Click that podcast tab. And of course, just find us on any social you've got. Look for Orange and Brown Talk. Give us a like. Give us a follow. All right, let's talk NFL draft on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Lance Reisland, Tim Bielik here with you. NFL draft pods continuing. Tim and Lance, it is good to see you guys once again as we continue towards the draft. We're trying to do a theme each week as we go through this. So the last one we did, it ran last week. If you missed it, head back to our feed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And you could see Tim and Lance's dueling top 10s. They did agree on some things. They disagreed on other things. Very typical of both of them. So today I had the idea that what we would do is each of you every year has like a handful of guys that, you know, you'll pound the table for. And Lance texts me like 50 times a day about like Peyton Wilson or someone like that. So you guys will have guys that you love in the draft. So I thought today what we would do is we're calling it a My Guys draft. So across the board, you know, can be, you know, available in any round. You can do a first rounder. You can do a 7th rounder. You could do an undrafted free agent if you want to. I don't care. We're going to do a My Guys draft where each of you will pick 5 guys that you will pound the table for that you want to see on the Cleveland Browns when we get through draft weekend here in a few weeks. So I know we hammered this out before we started, but I don't remember. Who did you guys agree should get the first pick here?
It's got to be Tim. It's got to be Tim.
All right,
It's got to be Tim.
All right, so we're going to let Tim have the first pick. We're going to try and do 5 each here as we go along. We'll talk about each guy as we go. So, Tim, lead us off. Who is the number 1 pick in the My Guys draft?
I'll start with the guy I had going in the second round of my first 7-round mock, and that's Indiana corner D'Angelo Pons. I mean, you want to talk about an absolute My Guy. This guy's got attitude at 5'9", 182, a guy that plays much bigger than his size. I mean, Indiana had him covering Jeremiah Smith in the Big Ten championship game. Yeah, he struggled, but that's because it's Jeremiah Smith. He's going to do that to everybody, and he'd probably do that to the vast majority of NFL corners right now. So I don't put that on D'Angelo Pons, but big, very good production, 4 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 11 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. And over his 3 college seasons, 33 pass breakups, 7 picks. He didn't allow a touchdown all season. And he's a guy who missed 2 tackles. Smaller, but I think considering that with this defense, I think the only thing that's missing to make it almost a perfect defense is the nickel, because I think they could use an upgrade from Miles Harden. And when you look at the last 2 Super Bowl teams, the Eagles and the Seahawks, they had outstanding nickels. The Eagles had Cooper DeJean. The outstanding nickels. The Eagles had Cooper DeJean, and the Seahawks had Nick Emenwari, both of whom were rookies at the time, and both of whom different skill sets to the nickel position. And there's so many different ways to play. But I think with Pons, you bring a corner mentality to the nickel position. Again, bring some physicality, and he is very, very good in zone coverage. Obviously, size is going to be interesting, and people are going to immediately point to him being a nickel, and I think that's ultimately what he's going to end up being. But I think there's more. It's me a little bit. The only hesitation I have is it's going to be a little bit of a transition, because in Indiana, he basically played on the outside most of the time. I think ultimately you could teach a guy different things about playing inside. Lance could be better at this than I am, but better at answering that question than I could. But for me, I just look at D'Angelo Pons. He is just so much fun out there to watch.
Lance, I feel like he's been gaining he's a guy that's out there, very popular. A lot of people really like him. What do you think of D'Angelo Pons?
Oh, I think he's outstanding. Now, there's a couple things. First of all, I have it I have him on my list too. I have a bunch of my guys, and the reason why is he's simply a great film breakdown. And my guys all come down to I didn't look at measurements, I didn't look at anything else, I didn't look what round, I just look what guys that on film I go, man, that's a good football player, and that's what Pons is. Now at 5'9", he has a 43.5-inch vertical leap. He's extremely good at the catch point for being that small. Now for the Browns, it'd be interesting because the nickel position has become so vital in the NFL. But if you're the Browns, and I had the idea of like Martin Emerson side. Now, when you're a Browns one high hat guy, that's different than being a two high hat nickel. If you're a two high hat nickel, you have to be the outside backer, which means you're going to cover the slot. You're going to play in space. In a one high hat system, sometimes you have run responsibilities. So depending on if they see 12 personnel, 11 personnel, what they, how they want to do things. But I think he's talented enough. I don't care about his height, and he just ran a great 40 at his pro day. He's an outstanding football player, and the measurements will probably push him down. I don't know why, but it probably will, just because of the fact that he doesn't fit the prototypical kind of like length and arm length and radius and hips and all those things that we talk about that are silly sometimes. He's just a really good football player, competes his butt off, and a really fun guy to watch.
And Tim, I think you make a good point there, and I think we've seen this over and over again, whether it's the Browns, whether it's other teams too. Just this idea that you can never have enough cornerbacks, and so obviously the Browns have Denzel Ward, they have Tyson Campbell, who they went out and acquired. It sounds like Martin Emerson probably isn't going to be back, but even if he is, he's coming off a pretty serious injury, so who knows what he'll even be when he gets back on the field. This idea of being able to upgrade at the cornerback position, not just handing Miles Harden a job, not just handing somebody a job there, and bringing in a guy like D'Angelo Pons to make that position better, to build on a strength. I think that's good draft strategy.
Yeah, and it's positional value, and like I said before, the way the nickel has evolved in the NFL, it's not a premium position, but it becomes so vital. And the thing that I look at with the nickel position, you could slice it 4 or 5 different ways. I mean, you could have safeties playing nickel, corners playing nickel. You could do a lot of different things with it. It's so versatile. I think it's very scheme dependent, and I think in some ways talent dependent, depending on, if you like a guy, bring him down to the nickel. We see the Lions used a second round pick a couple of years ago on Brian Branch, who was a safety. They brought him, he plays a lot of nickel, and he's really good at it. The Eagle, again, Cooper DeJean drafted as a corner. The Eagles put him in nickel. Big part of that Super Bowl winning defense. Nick Emenwori, athletic monster. We talked about him last year, whether he was safety number one in that class with Malachi Starks, who is now with the Ravens. He's a sleeper to Seahawks, and he plays a role in them winning a Super Bowl. In this NFL, where we see more, 3 receivers, 4 receivers than ever, you have to have multiple corners who can contribute. And you were talking about Martin Emerson, Dan. I think the thing with the Achilles injuries, I say this 1,000 times, it's a 2-year injury. It's 1 year to recover, 1 year to rehab and recover, and the other year to get back to 100%. And with D'Angelo Pons, yeah, he's a shorter corner, but I think he has that prototypical nickel size you're looking for. Yeah, we talk a lot about Denzel Ward being a smaller corner, but he proved he's one of the best corners in the NFL, despite, not being a big corner. And with D'Angelo Pons, he's not, I don't think he's Denzel Ward, but you see a lot of underrated physicality with him, and just a guy who I think his play style fits perfectly into, the culture of the Browns defense. Obviously, what they had with Jim Schwartz, you would imagine Mike Rudenberg is going to keep it very similar. And I think if that's the case, then the Angelo Pons, I feel like you could just slot him right into that third corner spot and let him go.
All right, Lance, you are up now with the next pick in our My Guys draft.
Well, my favorite guys always the last couple of years have trended towards the linebackers, right? We had Ivan Pace a couple of years ago, then Peyton Wilson. A guy that my favorite film breakdown this year has been Jacob Rodriguez. I absolutely love him out of Texas Tech. He had a good Senior Bowl. I was actually, I don't want to say this like in a negative way, but I actually thought he was going to test much worse than he did, and I didn't care because he's just such a good football player. He's a guy who plays sideline to sideline. The big thing about him is not the height, not the weight, not the speed. All those are good. His instincts are through the roof. Very Carson Schlesinger in terms of pulling the trigger. And Dan, I steal this from you all the time since you said it a number of years back about what the linebacker, how to describe the linebackers in a Browns defense, which under Schwartz and probably under Rutenberg is cleaning up the mess, right? Covering kicks. And that's a great way to look at it. There's no one more instinctual. That has a lot to do with instincts and reading and believing in what you see. Love Jacob Rodriguez. He's just a really productive guy. I did not think he would test as well as he did. That just kind of, that strengthens the film that I watch. But my favorite film guy, the guy that in our mock drafts, I'll be trying to sneak in there all the time because I just think he's a great football player.
All right, so we got two defensive guys. Tim, what do you think of Jacob Rodriguez?
I love him. Browns fans are going to hate me for this, but I had him go into the Bengals in my 7th-round Bengals mock from last week. I mean, this as good as David Bailey is, and he's going to be a top 10, probably possibly top 5 guy. I thought Rodriguez was the heart and soul of that Texas Tech defense. I mean, just he's got intelligence, athletic ability, like Lance was talking about, the way he tested the combine. I think he showed he's more athletic than maybe he gets credit for. The big thing that stands out to me is you look at his numbers, 7 forced fumbles. That's insane. Like, that is an incredible thing. If you not to go with 4 interceptions, that means he's caused, up to 11 turnovers. I didn't look to see how many of those fumbles his own team recovered, but anytime you're forcing that many fumbles, you're creating havoc in the passing game, you're playing downhill as a linebacker. I mean, I think I did see a comparison with Jacob Rodriguez to Carson Schlesinger. So this is a guy who, yeah, he's like, if he was 3 inches taller, he's easily, maybe a top 15 guy, I think, in this draft. Even though I personally don't think size is that much of an issue. I certainly don't think it is with Rodriguez, but that guy is absolute dynamite on defense. And I think any NFL team would love to have that guy.
So once again, here we are. I think, Lance, we went with the cornerback there first, linebacker second. It's sort of building strength on strength here, and I do think it's one of these things where when you look at this Browns roster, yes, you have a guy like Carson Schlesinger. Yes, you went out and got Quincy Williams, but like I do think this team could use more depth at the linebacker position. Just like I think they could use more depth at the cornerback position. I think the more guys as much as we talk about, man, this needs to be an offense heavy draft, making this defense even better, I think it's still a good thing.
Well, and I'm a big believer, and I still are. You win inside out, both sides of the ball, and defense still can win you championships. And that doesn't take away that the Browns need to improve their offense. They need to get more skill guys. They need to get more touch guys, which a lot of my guys coming up are touch guys. But the idea that you're never wrong taking linemen and you're never wrong improving your defense. It doesn't mean I always like it or it's the route I would go. But if you look at teams that constantly stack talent, and that's when you're taking guys, it's like it's the idea of Jeremiah Love. The pushback I've gotten from Jeremiah Love usually comes with like Judkins is there. I don't care if the Browns had 3 really good tailbacks. He's the most explosive guy in the draft for me. So I don't care what we have. I'm going to find ways to get this guy the ball. And that's just kind of what, defensively, I think the same way. And those linebackers in this defense got to be really rugged. They're playing forward with their hair on fires, running into 300-pounders most of the time. They got to have some depth there.
And the other part of this, when we're talking about draft picks and bringing guys in, is we know Andrew Berry kind of looks at the draft one way and free agency the other way. So again, you lose a Devin Bush, you go out, you add Quincy Williams, you bring in a guy like a Jacob Rodriguez. Obviously, Tim, one of the ways to set these guys up for success is to make sure that, like, maybe you don't have to come in and play right away. Maybe you can sit behind a guy for a little while. Maybe you can play fewer snaps while Quincy Williams takes most. You know what I mean? Like, there's different ways. Just because you draft a guy doesn't mean he has to be on the field right away. These guys can take some time to learn.
That's the ideal scenario. You would love to have a guy. You would always love to have an impact playmaker from day one, like a Carson Schlesinger. You would love to have a guy like Harold Fannin who just immediately steps in and is flirting. If he's healthy and maybe has better offensive line play, better quarterback play, we're talking about 1,000-yard potential tight end certainly within the next couple of years. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets there, but doesn't mean it has to always be that way. I mean, especially when you talk about guys in the 3rd round and after, those are guys that you typically want to let marinate. You want to let them learn the scheme, adjust to the pro game, maybe get stronger, work on some technical things, because at that point in the draft, there's a reason guys get passed on 70, 80, 90, 100 times. There's a reason for that. And I think in the case of Schlesinger, yeah, he was kind of forced to start in a way because of, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's injury situation, but also, I think he was just that good. Like, you couldn't keep him off the field because he was just that special. from day one. And I think if you have a rookie who does that, a guy who is just so good in practice that you can't possibly keep off the field, no matter when you take him, whether it's first round or sixth round, you play him. If you feel like he's dominating in practice, doing everything the coaches ask of him, preparing like a pro, doing the things that get his body right like a pro. Why hold him back? In some ways with rookies, it's I think in the best cases, it's more up to the player themselves to tell you that they're ready to play with how they work and how they prepare behind the scenes.
Okay, Tim, let's move on to your second pick, our third pick in the My Guys draft.
Another guy I had going in my 7th-round mock, Ted Hurst, the receiver from Georgia State, 6'4", 206. I see Lance's smile right there. We were kind of talking about him a little bit in the text the other day. He's an interesting prospect, 6'4", 206, but he's got really good speed. This is kind of a physical maybe physical specimen is the wrong way to put it. Like, he's not an uber athlete, but I still think he's a very good athlete. And I know I know I've talked before in the my draft mailbag that, physical attributes are something I don't typically look for in receivers. What I want to look for is how they win one-on-one. And Ted Hurst is a guy who can win with his size. He's really good to get tested situations, especially jump ball situations in the red zone and the end zone. Those are things he excels at, but can also run by you. He's not just going to jump over you. He's going to run by you because he's fast. He's got these great athletic tools, forced 18 missed tackles per PFF. And at 6'4", 206, that's an incredible stat. Yeah, it's against group of six competition most of the time, but, still, even against like Vanderbilt, the last 2 seasons had solid production, and he fits the metric I was talking about last week about yards per route run versus zone, 2.63 for his career. So it's above that 2.3 threshold. And what there are concerns, that, he has some drop issues. I think it was like a 9% drop rate last season for Georgia State. But I do think, obviously, I think at that range, when you're talking like round number 3 early on or even later on, for me, it's more about what a guy can do. And the Browns don't have a lot of size at receiver outside of Cedric Tillman. So I think with Hurst, you have a guy who can win a lot of different ways. And I think he's got a chance to really be a good contributor pretty quickly.
Lance, I know this is a guy you wanted, a guy that you might have picked in this had Tim not taken him.
Well, you know what I love about, because doing this a long time with Tim. Tim was very honorable in his, a lot. Who should we take? And I said, absolutely take him, because he's got to be on one of our boards. I think he's an outstanding player. And the thing I always talk about when people talk about Power 4 or Group of 6 or however you want it, these are Division I athletes. And I know a lot of times the difference for me would be the front 7. When I was playing at Kent in the 90s, the corners, the receivers, I played with lots of guys who played in the NFL, OJ Santiago, Eugene Baker, guys who were really good and played in the NFL. The outside skill guys are closer sometimes than those big guys inside. The front 7, especially defenses, what I always say is what really separates a Power 4 school sometimes, and the depth at those positions. Hurst is the big guy. I think he's got better run after catch. He's kind of, even though he's a big kid, he can run with the ball. He's really good in space. He's good off press coverage. As again, receivers, I do your release versus man in zone at the catch point and run after catch. And he's pretty good at all 3. Both versus man, both in zone, understanding where he's got to be. Yeah, really good player. Has a chance to help in the red zone right away because of his length. He high points the ball as well as anybody in the draft, including Carnell Tate.
Yeah, and again, just to sort of frame this as the Browns roster, I mean, Tim, you had mentioned, the Browns don't have a lot of size at receiver outside of Cedric Tillman, and one of the issues there is Ced has had trouble staying on the field. So even when he has shown those flashes, he's had trouble staying on the field. To me, when it comes to receiver, that's one of those positions where there's not a player on this roster that would prevent me from drafting a player that I really liked. I think that's a wide open position just across the board.
Yeah, and I'll go back to my mailbag. These are the things I kind of look for when it comes to receivers. Maybe in order. How do they win one-on-one? Can they separate? How are their hands? What are their plus attributes? Are they a contested catch guy, a yak guy, a speed guy, and how productive they are? Those are my big 5. And I think with Hurst, like I said, he can win one-on-one in numerous ways, and he wins with this. He can separate in man, and he can also find space in zone. And Lance, again, I think you can probably answer this question better than I can. It feels like a different skill set to win in zone versus man, and that's become so important because most teams run zone 70% of the time. But from getting back to just a pure Browns perspective, I mean, this receiver room needs a jolt of competition. It needs an injection of youth and injection of talent. I said before that the last time the Browns took a receiver in the first 2 rounds of a draft was Corey Coleman 10 years ago. And you, as much as we talk about, people want to talk about doubling up on, offensive line and stuff like that. As much, I get that. I 100% understand that. But this is a position, receiver's the position I feel like I would double up on, because especially it's a good draft for receivers. It's not as good as a couple years ago, but I still think it's very good, especially when it comes to depth. And the Browns haven't added anything at receiver, but I think I believe they've had a lot of guys in for top 30 visits that are receivers, especially the top guys. So I don't know, maybe that's telling me that they're going to be busy at that, but I do think they have to at least add a couple guys. If nothing else, you have to create some competition there and really give whoever's playing quarterback a fair shot to actually, be able to make some plays in the passing game.
All right, Lance, why don't you give us your second pick here in the My Guys draft?
Well, this is a guy who's down on my list a little bit, interior lineman, but he's probably my favorite interior lineman just because. And then I heard him interview. It's Keylan Rutledge, guard out of Georgia Tech. He's angry, and when they interview him, he's angry. And when he blocks people, some of his weaknesses is he's trying to bury you every single time. He's the most violent offensive lineman in the draft, and I'm not saying he's the best offensive lineman, but he's the most violent. You can tell when he gets in a stance. You can watch his offhand. I always tell people, watch the offhand as an offensive lineman. If it's twitching, he's ready to hit you. So just love his film. He makes mistakes. He struggles a little bit in pass protection if they get in wide threes, wide fives, etc. But if you like an interior lineman who's going to fight you to death, gap scheme, blocking down, he's really good on doubles, getting to the second level. He's not a great athlete, but there's a lot of want to. And one of the measurements, I've always said this about Andrew Berry. I love some of the things he does with numbers, but the things that numbers don't, the hardest position to kind of measure with only numbers is offensive line, because those guys are like wrestlers. You have to be nasty. So I love Keylan Rutledge. Again, I understand the weaknesses. This is simply guys that I put on the film, and I watch a lot of film, and usually I stop taking notes, and usually I stop whatever I'm doing, and I just kind of smile because it's a guy who loves to play football. And then they interviewed him, and I was sold because he was like, they asked him a simple question. He was like mad at it. And that's kind of the attitude I like with offensive linemen.
Tim, when we talk about O-linemen and this team adding guys, really, again, across the board and even doubling up in some spots where they sign a free agent and then they draft someone behind them, something we've seen Andrew Berry do before, finding value on the interior is really important because, maybe you're going to take a tackle at 6 or maybe you're going to take one at 24. That's where you take those guys. But then you've got to find value on the interior. And I think of like a Joel Bitonio, who was a second-round pick and has been one of the best Browns linemen since they came back. Maybe he's going to get some Hall of Fame consideration. Wyatt Teller was a day 3 pick, and he turned into a really good player. This is one of those positions that you can find value in the draft from, really in all 7 rounds. And so I think it's important to pick the right guys there.
I've said 1,000 times, no matter how good or how bad your offensive line is, I want another. It's great, good, get another guy. And I'm glad Lance brought up Keylan Rutledge. I'm really glad he did that because he was a guy I almost forgot about. Then he said it. I'm like, oh yeah, Keylan Rutledge. I love that guy. And I think for me, part of it is also kind of where he comes from. Georgia Tech, I think, is kind of starting to become a little bit of that Utah Miami thing where it's an offensive line based culture. It's a running football culture. There's going to be another Georgia Tech player to talk about, and his stock has kind of hurt a little bit because of that Georgia Tech style. But going to what Lance said about Keylan Rutledge, talking about his personality, when you're trying to rebuild the offensive line, when you're trying to change the culture and of that offensive line, you want guys who just play angry. And if Keylan Rutledge is that guy who plays angry, again, competition is never a bad thing. Even though the Browns signed Zion Johnson and Elton Jenkins for the interior of the offensive line, why not just get a guy who's just physical and nasty on the offensive line, especially with the run game, because we saw last year how many times did Quinshon Judkins have to really create almost all of his own yardage on runs. There were times where he had to do it all himself. If you get a guy like Rutledge who can make plays and get to the second level and create, big running lanes to just be an intimidating force, that is someone you absolutely go after. Honestly tempted to put Gennings Dunker from Iowa in there, partially because I kind of love to see the mullet. I think Browns fans would fall in love with the
It's
hair.
glorious. It's glorious.
Yeah, it's an A grade. If we're using baseball terms, it's an 80 grade mullet, and I think Browns fans would love it immediately, especially if he's a good player. But I kind of took him out of there. I still love him, but I think Keylan Rutledge, I really enjoy him. His profile is really good, and he keeps sticking out to me as a round 3 type of guy.
Lance, I thought that's where you were going when you were setting up that pick. I actually was starting to type that onto the doc I have of displaying here with our list of guys, and then you threw that curveball there. So I thought you were going that direction.
Well, I try, he's right up there. And what I try to do is when you came out, when you told us, whenever it was, when you sent the text to us and you're like, hey, let's do this. I try to go with guys that make me smile when I watch film. Jennings Dunker's one of those guys too, but I think he's a guy, like Tim was saying, that Keylan Rutledge is a guy, is the kind of guys kind of forget about because of Dunker and Oli Avega, Owana, and all those guys. He's just a really mean football player. And I went with 5 guys that make me smile, and I stopped taking notes because I know they love playing football. And Keylan Rutledge is one of those guys. Jennings Dunker's there too. Don't get me wrong, but I like Rutledge. He's a mean dude.
Okay,
I was going to say also, sorry to interrupt you, but considering the Browns teams for off their line, they're lucky that this is a good class for, because I'm going to do my position rankings. This is actually a very good year to need interior offensive line, better than most years, not just at the top end with guys like Emmanuel Pregnon and Vega Ioane, but again, the depth, Rutledge, Dunker, Connor Lew from Auburn, for example, just a lot of guys out there that could fill some interior positions for the Browns and for honestly a lot of teams out there.
Okay, Tim, we are up to number 3 now on your board.
Maybe a little off the board, but I'm going to go Kentucky center Jagger Burton. It's pronounced like Mick Jagger. I looked that up before we came on to make sure I got it right, and apparently it's pronounced like Mick Jagger. 6'4", 312. The reason I have him on here, he fits the most proven analytic there is as far as, hacking the draft. That 4.47 short shuttle for offensive linemen almost guarantees you a starter. He ran it at his pro day at 4.45. So for me, I would just chisel him in stone as a guy that if he's available and you want to draft him, you absolutely should, just based on that alone. But this guy's played a lot of football, 47 consecutive starts. He's played multiple positions, right guard, left guard. He played this season at center. Didn't allow a sack in 12 games. Didn't allow a sack in 817 snaps. Did allow 12 quarterback hurries, but still solid production. He's another high motor guy, and with offensive line, things you have to have. You have to have mobility and you have to have a motor. And I think Jagger Burton has those things. I think he needs to get stronger. I think he needs to, play with more physicality. And I do think, the thing that comes up a lot when people talk about him is leverage, that he needs to really work on that. And those are things, you can obviously work on to improve, but especially considering the Browns, we don't know who's going to be the center. I think Jagger Burton is worth, maybe a flyer as early as round 4, just based on his athletic traits, based on his versatility. This is a guy who feels like, based on his agility, his intelligence, and his motor, he's going to find a home somewhere on the offensive line as possibly a starter.
Yeah, so one of the things that I always kind of pay attention to as we go through the offseason, an offensive line for this team is a little tricky right now because just as we're recording this right now on April 2nd, we still don't know for sure what Joel Bitonio is going to do. They've been acting like, they're hedging here, obviously, that maybe he's not going to come back. But we don't know the answer to that question. That being said, Lance, it seems to me like when you kind of look at the areas where they've kind of left things open, Elton Jenkins has been better as a guard. He's fine as a center, but he was a Pro Bowler as a guard. So center feels like one of those positions they've maybe left open a little bit, unless Joel comes back and then they slide Elton Jenkins over to center. So that's why I kind of think like at some point, probably relatively early in the draft, I'm not talking first or second round, but at some point in the draft, we're probably going to see them take a center.
Yeah, I agree with Tim on Connor Lou. He's outstanding. I have Slaughter as my number one center out of Florida. But once again, these guys who can play interior. And what I like what the Browns did, and I think this is super underrated, is Elton Jenkins can swing out to tackle. Now, people talk about going from right to left tackle to right tackle, and that has been a topic of conversation. And the pushback I've gotten has been incredible on that. And obviously, the Browns have a bad taste in their mouth with that. And so I appreciate that. But what that really means is that when they go out, it doesn't mean you can do it. It just means I'm kind of with Andrew on Barry on this a little bit more. The more and more I think about it, because even at the high school level, if a guy has good feet, so they're assuming that a guy that has really good feet can do this. Now, when you watch Jenkins play from center to guard to tackle, his footwork is outstanding. So they can bump. If they like one of these interior linemen better, they can bump Jenkins out the tackle. I know it's not something they want to do. You hope Jones is going to be available, but I'm telling you, Elton Jenkins can play the left tackle at a very high level with his feet. And that allows you to move guys inside, draft inside if that's where you want to go. It also allows you to not reach on a tackle. If you don't love a guy early on, you can get a guy that you really like. Because again, I'm big on stacking talent, not filling needs. So yeah, this interior class I really like. I like their toughness. This Jagger's another guy who's just really tough. Could play guard center. And obviously he's got all the things you got to work on when you're a raw athlete, but he's a mean guy and he likes to block. So I'm good with it. And he went to Frederick Douglass, which I have called some of their games before in the past when they played Ohio teams. Really good football program in high school.
It's a great name too. I think honestly, we should just do a name draft at some point. Just favorite draft names. I think we've got just this list, man. It's a good variety of names so
Yeah,
far.
no, I'm with
So
you.
we've got a
agree.
Keylan, we've got a Jagger, we've got even Ted Hurst is like I don't know. That's a guy I'd expect to see on like having a role on Breaking Bad or something, like an actor with a SAG card, like Ted Hurst. Man, did you see him in this new Netflix show? I love all these names, Tim.
Yeah, Ted Hurst feels like either like he's a stock trader from 1983 or a recurring character on the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I feel like
Always had a cigarette in his mouth, like that kind of guy, right? Tight suit on, always a cigarette in his mouth. Absolutely.
Well, don't forget we also have a Pons and we almost had a Dunker. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think even if we want to throw Connor Lew in there because it's spelled Lew. I've never heard that spelling for Lew, but this could be one of the best all name drafts we've ever seen. So from that perspective alone, it makes this fun.
All right, let's keep moving along here. Lance, give us your third pick, and this would be the sixth pick in our draft.
Well, this is going to be a third day guy that I absolutely love on film, Zachariah Branch. So there's another good name for us, Zach Branch, kid out of Georgia. He's lightning in a bottle. Now, I'm going to say this, and I got to clarify because people have talked to me about Jeremiah Love at running back, and now Zachariah Branch as a pure slot. And people who are really good at this stuff, such as you guys, I understand now position value, draft commodities, draft equity, all these words that I have to look up because I'm not very smart. But I will tell you one thing about Zachariah Branch. He's a guy that is a touch guy. Same thing I think about Love. So I'm positioned with Zachariah Branch. What does that mean? That means you can put him on the field wherever you want. And you can put him in the running back. You can motion him out of the backfield if it's a man team to find the matchup you want. You can put him in the slot. I don't like to use the word slot, but that's the touch area for me. Short balls in space. You can also put him outside if you get a zone team that likes to play off. You could run hitches, slants, hitches and goes, sluggos, simple, clean, easy routes, quick game routes, 3 steps for the quarterback, depending on what coverage you're going to get. Now, you don't want him outside versus press. He wouldn't play outside against the Browns because he would struggle getting off press versus the teams that play off zone or off man. He can play outside as well. And then if they're a team that plays press man, put him in the backfield, motion him out to 3 strong, get a linebacker or safety on him. So there's a lot of things you could do with Zachariah Branch. This is the sudden twitchy guy I always talk about. Love his film. I think he's outstanding.
This is a guy that kind of goes in that category of, as we go through this draft, who will be the Todd Monken guys in this draft? Like, who will be the guys that Todd Monken looks at and says, I need a running back like that, or I need a receiver like that, or I need an offensive lineman like that. Obviously, Andrew Berry and this scouting staff are the guys that are going to be making these picks. They put in all this work on these guys. But at some point, Tim, Todd Monken is going to have a type. And I feel like, I don't know if we ever ever got a feel for what Kevin Stefanski's type was at wide receiver, even though he's here for 6 years. I think we figured out some other positions. I want to know what a Todd Monken type is at receiver. And I feel like a versatile touch guy, like Lance likes to call them, I feel like that might be a Todd Monken type of player.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on the Stefanski thing, about we never really found his receivers. I think, kind of what Lance saying, I felt like he was more a system guy than, a player's guy. That's not meant to be a knock on him. Certainly the system was successful. It took the Browns to the playoffs twice in 6 years after only going once in the first 20 plus. So certainly give him credit for that. But I do think, certainly could have been more an emphasis on receiver. But going to Zachariah Branch, for me, he feels like one of the most divisive guys in this entire draft class. I think I saw, the ESPN dueling mock on Thursday with Mel Kiper and Field Yates. They had him going in the second round to the Bengals. And, some people see him as a day 2 guy. Some people see him as like a mid-day 3 guy. And I think it's an understanding of how you have to use him. Now, Zachariah Branch was started his career at US, did not start his career at Georgia. So he and Todd Monken never had an intersect, in their careers, when Monken was obviously the offensive coordinator in Georgia. So certainly I'm sure there's maybe a couple connections there, maybe particularly Monroe Freeling. I think they had a brief intersection there. But with Branch, I'm looking at his numbers right now, 81 catches, but 44 of them were bubble screens. 313 yards. This is for PFF. 313 yards of bubble screens, well, the second most in the country. So if you're drafting him, you have to put that in the game plan. You have to basically say, we're just going to throw a bubble screen. We're going to throw 2 bubble screens a game, at least, to Zachariah Branch, or you're going to run drag routes with him. And certainly I think he can be a deep ball guy. But the other thing that stands out, breaking tackles, 20 missed tackles forced. So that's tied for 17th again per PFF. Only 2 drops. So the hands are very good. I've always said before, I'm not a person who's going to take a guy out of a mix because, his size isn't good, and 5'9", 177, obviously that's not big size. But with Branch, again, there's just certainly, I think if you draft Zachariah Branch, you have to have a real good plan of how you're going to maximize him, because he fits a certain way. And if you kind of treat him like a different, like just a smaller receiver, have him run the deep ball and do that constantly, I think you're misusing Zachariah Branch.
Lance, I think, and you've talked a lot about Todd Monken and sort of what he does well. And I think something Tim said there was important. And that was just this idea of being intentional about getting a guy the ball, and figuring out a way to get the ball in his hands. And I think that's something that I was certainly critical of Kevin Stefanski about at times is, let's use Jerry Jeudy as an example. Be sitting there watching, and we'd be midway through the third quarter and Jerry hadn't even gotten a target yet. And at some point, as a coach or a play caller, you just got to find a way to get that guy a target, because otherwise he's going to get tired of running routes and tired of blocking and tired of being asked to do all the things you ask him to do. I do think a guy like this, guys on this roster who maybe need some early touches, just get them involved, let them feel the football in their hands a little bit. I think that's an area where Todd Monken should be able to excel is, hey, maybe it's not the perfect play at the perfect moment every time, but we just got to get the football in this guy's hands so he can be engaged and be involved in the offense.
Well, going back to the system. So if you're a receiver in this system, there's not lots of things that isolate for you. So, and Dan, we back when we were doing this, when the Rams won the Super Bowl, I remember the podcast, we talked about it. We actually texted that night when we were talking about, like, we all knew who was getting the ball in that last drop. It was Cooper Kupp. And they did a bunch of different things to get him the ball in space. And that's really what it comes down to. So when you're a system, there's really not a lot of things involved for you alone, right? All 11 spokes on the wheel have to be working. And whatever the defense doesn't cover is where you're supposed to go with the ball. The hard thing for me, and high school coaches have to do this all the time because you never have 11 perfect parts, is that it doesn't create touches. And everybody's talked about Jerry Jeudy. I can promise you, and maybe I've been wrong, but in my mind, I can promise you that Jerry Jeudy will get an early touch on that first drive almost every week. Because when you look back, and it doesn't even have to be a vertical throw. It could be a simple bubble screen. It could be an RPO where he's running an inside slant, a hitch route versus soft man. There will be an early touch. Todd Monken's a guy who understands that some guys need the ball in their hand. They need to hear their name on the announcement. You would love everybody to be fighting for the team. All that stuff's great. But as a coach, you got to figure out what makes these guys tick. And a guy like Zachariah Branch, Jerry Jeudy, these guys get going because of getting touches. And you think about Zachariah Branch, you just think about this. He's going to make you block 5 or 6 and not 7 or 8. And that's the key for an offensive line power run game.
Okay, let's keep it moving. We are up to Tim, his 4th pick in this draft.
Going back to some defense, give me TCU safety Bud Clark. You know, a guy who's I saw Lance perked up a little bit there.
Yeah, I like that one. I like that one. That's a. I didn't think you were coming with that one. I like it, my friend. I like it.
Yeah, 6'1", 188 stands out to me because I mean, a lot of production, you know, through his career. He's a 60-year senior, so maybe that kind of takes him out of the Browns' range because we know Andrew Berry typically likes to go with younger prospects versus older ones. So maybe this and the last guy I talked about maybe are more wishful thinking from my perspective than, you know, what I think is going to actually happen. But Bud Clark, this is a guy who's very productive, 21 pass breakups, 15 interceptions in his career, had a pick 6 against Michigan in the playoffs a few years ago when TCU, I think, stunned everybody by beating Michigan. This is a guy who plays very aggressive, you know, and that works both ways. It allows him to make plays, but it can also get him burned. So I think I always am leaning on the guys who are more aggressive because I feel like I would rather have to reel a guy back in than try and tell a guy that he needs to be more aggressive. I want a guy who thinks aggressive, who plays that way, who acts that way, and have to tell him to back off because, you know, if you need him to turn it up to that level, he can get to that level. Now, Clark, I think, is more leans, even though he's a pretty good tackler, I think he leans more center field safety than box safety just because of his size. Like at 6'1", 188, he's not as big as, you know, going back to last year with Nick Emmanwori, who was 6'3", 200 plus pounds. Bud Clark is kind of smaller, so I think he's more of that free safety. Maybe if he plays nickel, I think he's more of that pass coverage nickel, a guy who can tackle. I don't think he's going to be bad in run situations. I just think he's going to be better in pass situations. And again, a reason why I don't think he'll go to the Browns, you know, like I said, 60-year senior, the guy who's been in, you know, played a lot of college football. And like I've said before, with Andrew Berry, he typically, more often than not, avoids those older players at all costs.
Safety is an interesting position. It's one of those positions that I wonder, Lance, I'm not saying this is an attack on you, but it's one of those positions I wonder if they would have addressed had they not taken Dylan Gabriel when they did last year. But
I like Xavier Watts at that pick, by the way, just so everybody knows. But I did like the Dylan pick, but Xavier Watts was a guy I loved at that position.
Yeah, so this is one of those positions where I look at it and I see it as like, look, if Ronnie Hickman ends up coming back and the Browns use that right of first refusal tag on him, he's fine as that deep safety. And anything that allows Grant Delpit to play more in the box, play more nickel, all of that stuff is better for this defense. That being said, the fact that they did just use the right of first refusal tag on Ronnie Hickman tells you, like, they think he's fine. They want to have him back, but they also see him probably as a little bit replaceable as well, which is fair. This is an undrafted free agent who's certainly turned himself into a good NFL player, but he is what he is. Lance, I'm all for adding a safety in this spot. Adding a safety in this draft, because I think that's still a need for this football team.
Well, this is a cool one for me because this is the guy that I love. He's my 3rd safety on the board. So not only is I have a much higher, I don't know why, but, and I think it's because of the Browns kind of connection. He is a true, Tim said it best, he's a true one hi-hat safety. He's a guy who goes sideline to sideline. He's a really good tackler in space. And it's one hi-hat safety. You have to get over the top. You have to make sure you tackle because when you're in a pressure front, you are going to get beat deep in press man coverage occasionally, and you are going to get a free runner in the run game just because everybody's playing with their hair on fire and will overrun things. And the big runs last year that I'm doing a cover right now, it all comes with overrunning stuff. Not because of lack of effort, it's almost too much effort. Bud Clark is a guy I love. Awesome ball skills, high points the ball, good tackler, plays with the hair on fire, has played with his, has played down in the box. And with Rutenberg, that will be important because of the fact Rutenberg, the front 7 will look the same, but the safety and the shell, the Browns will be in a too high shell a bunch. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to play too highs. They're just going to give that look, and that allows you to blitz from different angles, especially simulated pressures, etc., where you're going to replace with that safety down to that side. So now, if they were to motion, shift, all those kind of things, he can play in the box if necessary. Obviously, we want Delpit to be in the box, but he's a guy who's tough enough to do that. Because again, in this defense, you get caught down in the box as a safety, you could have C or D gap run fits. You got to be able to tackle. And I think Bud Clark is awesome. I have him as my third safety. He's my second favorite behind Jacob Rodriguez. Absolutely love him. I'm glad Tim likes him too, because that tells me I'm not as crazy as normal. Really good player. Love his ball skills and his ability to go get the ball. It's like my dad used to say, he's like a dog with a frisbee. He sees it and he goes gets it.
Did Tim steal one of your picks here? Was this a guy on your board?
Yes, it was. I will say that. Yes, it was. But I always come prepared with backups because I know usually Tim's a lot smarter than me, so I don't worry about my picks because I know that's why he can go first, because I'll have a guy that he won't have. But no, Bud Clark's a good one. He's awesome.
All right. Well, Lance, let's see who you've got next here.
My next one is a tight end, Oscar Delp. I love Oscar Delp. Now, I've heard this, speaking of Bud Clark and Zachariah Branch, I've seen this guy all over the board in terms of where he's going to go day 1, 2, or 3. I think he runs really well. I also like Sam Roush in this position because he's a guy who can play fullback, put his hand on the ground, but they've kind of addressed that now with Whiteheart and Stahl. So I like Oscar Delp. Oscar Delp's a guy who can play. He's not a functional tight end. What I mean, he's not going to put his hand on the ground every single time and block you. It's just kind of like, Bud Clark. You don't want him in the box every time, but he can do it if necessary, if caught in that situation. Love Oscar Delp's ability to run. I love Oscar Delp's ability to get in the seam. He's got a full route tree from the tight end. He's also got a full slot route tree from the tight end, which means he can run those bubble screens. He can also run RPOs. He's great on corner routes. He's a great vertical seam runner, which is huge in the NFL if you get a one hi-hat safety. Ran really well, catches the ball really well. One of the things about being in a Kevin Stefanski, this is a great example. If you're in a system offense, Oscar Delp struggles because he's going to be forced to be a true tight end sometimes. Monken won't use him like that. Occasionally he will, but for the most part, you're going to see this guy as an attached tight end, moving around, using his skill set against linebackers and safeties. Love this guy as a big tight end, big physical, fast tight end, limited blocking skills. We'll get better at that. Needs to be able to block at the second level more than he does the first level. He's not going to hammer a 5 technique in an odd front, but he will get his nose in there. And this is a guy in the pass game that could be really, really good at 6'5" and long arms and great catch radius. Just a really good football player.
Again, a really interesting kind of Todd Monken situation, just because when he came here in 2019, he was kind of touted as this air raid guy. He's bringing the air raid to the Cleveland Browns, and he's gonna, make that part of their offense with Freddie Kitchens. Of course, we know what happened in 2019 and how much of a disaster that was, how miserable Todd Monken was. Tim, now with Todd coming back, he just spent a few years, obviously he was with Georgia. Now he was in Baltimore, where they were so reliant on, of course, that running quarterback, tight ends, big personnel, a fullback, all of that stuff. I feel like even though Kevin Stefanski and his penchant for big personnel is in Atlanta now, I feel like the Browns are still kind of on that big personnel train. Like Todd Monken did a lot of that in Baltimore. I think he's going to want to do a lot of that here. And so adding tight ends in the draft is going to be part of that equation.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Georgia thing. I mean, Oscar Delp was on that national championship team in 2022, so with Todd Monken as the offensive coordinator. That was the team that beat Ohio State in that great Peach Bowl. But with Delp, I just did my tight end rankings. They're, for me, the weakest position group of the draft, but I have Delp ranked number 4 I have him as kind of a 3rd to 4th round guy. And for me, what stands out is the athletic ability. I think in some ways, Delp is a projection because of what he looks like he could be versus what he has been. And at his Georgia Pro Day, they said it was the reports are all over the place, kind of what he ran in the 40, but by a lot of accounts, it's sub 4.5, so well under that 4.76 threshold that I've talked about with tight ends that I wrote about last year when I was talking about hacking the draft and how that's a benchmark where if you run it, you're so much more likely to be successful in the NFL than if you don't, as far as just production is concerned. And with Delp, production's the one concern I had. Never had more than 300 yards in a season. Then again, I'm not going to put that on him necessarily because Georgia's offense, since Todd Monken left 3 years ago to become to go back to the NFL when he took the job in Baltimore with the Ravens as the OC. That Georgia offense has not been the same since then. So I'm not going to put it all on Delp. I do think, I wonder what his production would have looked like if Todd Monken was still there, for the last couple seasons. So, and for me, again, projection guy, no question about it. It's a weak tight end class, but I'm always willing to bank on athletes, and certainly Monken probably knows a little bit about Oscar Delp. So I don't know if he would be pounding the table for Delp, but certainly you would feel like there's enough connection there that he has enough knowledge of Delp where he could be like, he may not have produced in college, but this is a guy I feel like he can be a solid depth tight end for us down the road.
And Lance, I do think they're going to do some creative things with their tight ends. I mean, we saw it in Baltimore, and Harold Fannin showed last year with the previous coaching staff that he was pretty much up for anything. I mean, he was taking snaps, he was lining up in the backfield, he was playing traditional tight end, he was splitting out. So you already have a tight end in Harold Fannin that you can do so much with, and who has certainly has Pro Bowls in his future after what we saw last year. So if you keep adding to that group to complement him, I think that's only a good thing.
And I'm a little bit higher on the tight ends than Tim. And first of all, that's what my stat with the 4.7 is one of the few stats that I use that I really helps with tight ends, because it really is the ability to run. Obviously, Tim, has the exact 4.7 number. For me, it's just the fluidity on film. So there's so many fluid tight ends in this draft that could do so many things. And I was asked Ashley this morning, why is 12 personnel important? And here's why it's important with a guy like Oscar Delp if he was to be matched up. So Browns come out in 12 personnel, 2nd down and 5. Browns come out in it with Fannin and Oscar Delp. Let's assume it's week 6 and they're blocking a little bit better inside. They're going to come out with a double play call from Todd Monken. So they're gonna bring those two in. They're gonna wait to see what they're gonna say. The defensive guy is gonna hold up 12 personnel. They're gonna see what personnel runs in there. If they run in regular, they're gonna throw the ball with matchups. They're gonna come out in a 10 personnel look, doubles, trips, etc. Now, if they come out nickel, look for them to be in more of a power run set and make that nickel back tackle. So these tight ends that are ability to move, ability to do things, ability to power run just enough. And, Fannin's done that where he's just enough. He doesn't have to be great at it. It's just enough to punish teams if you want to go nickel. And that's what these fluid tight ends. Now, the traditional tight end, that's kind of a dying art. It's like the slot position to me. It's a touch guy and it's a move tight end. And the tight end's got to be able to do a bunch of things right now in the NFL. I think Oscar Delp has a chance to be really good at it.
Okay, let's wrap up this draft here. Each of you making one more pick. Tim, who have you got at number 5?
I'm going to go with the guy who's probably, end of the draft, maybe UDFA, Eric Rivers from Georgia Tech, 5'10", 176. He's got an interesting story. This was a guy who, walked on at Memphis as a defensive back, then, missed 2022, walked on again at FIU, Florida International. And in his second year of Florida FIU, was a third-team AP All-American. That was the season he had 62 catches, almost 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns in his second season as a collegiate receiver. That's incredible. He transfers to Georgia Tech, and production takes a dip, 46 catches, 658 for yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not surprising, his numbers kind of took a dip. That's always, tough when you make that transition from power group of 6 to the ACC, to a Power 4 conference like the ACC, and especially Georgia Tech, as we talked about with Keylan Rutledge. That's a program that really lean run much more with Haynes King as the quarterback. So certainly you can understand why Eric Rivers maybe wasn't as productive as I think people thought he was going to be. Dynamic speed also with a 4.35 40. And I think that's the way he wins, with pure speed. Watching his film, he's pretty good in intermediate areas. He's a 2.78 YPRR for his zone. So that immediately catches my attention. And when I talk about that set, I threw this out to Dan and Lance as well with my grand theory of analytics. It doesn't necessarily tell you who to take. It tells you who not to take more, because you look at profiles. You want to look at guys who, certain guys are going to succeed better if they hit this. That's not a guarantee. It's just they have a better chance. And those are guys, I think, especially late in the draft, I would be willing to take flyers on. And for Rivers, certainly speed, his ability again to win in zone, be successful in zone. I think that's important, and you want to have guys who can you want to as much as you get need jump ball threats, speedsters. You want some zone beaters as well, and I think Eric Rivers has the potential to be that now. Reason I don't think he would go to the Browns. Same thing with Bud Clark. He's a guy. He's old. He's going to be older. He's going to be 24 in mid September. So I think this is a guy who you could take round 6 or 7, maybe maybe you try to get him as a priority UDFA if he goes undrafted, but I think he's got a sneaky chance to be a solid pro.
I thought when you texted that to us, I thought that was really interesting. The idea of red flags being, or some of those analytics, some of that data being kind of indicating why you should maybe stay away from a player. It's the Ty Simpson discussion, right? You watch some of the Ty Simpson film and it's awesome, but are you willing to overlook that he's started 15 games and he's 6'1"? Are you willing to overlook that for what you saw when he was really good at Alabama? We'll have a Ty Simpson discussion, maybe some other pod here, but I did think that was interesting, Lance. Just this idea of analytics and data can create these red flags because we have so much history we're working off of. Is a player good enough in your eyes to overcome that?
Well, here's the interesting thing about zone. Once again, when Tim talks about like these numbers, I always try to say, all right, what does that mean to me as a football coach? And when I look at zone numbers, what a receiver who's good against zone tells you two things. One is obviously he's got to be a good run after catch guy, because usually zones are meant to keep you in front. They're going to try to umbrella you, especially in the NFL with so much too high hats. So you think about the umbrella. They have to be able to catch it and create yards on their own. But more importantly, the top thing that it tells you against zone is they understand the game of football. Who are the deep defenders? Who are the flat defenders? Where is my hot? And where do I have to be for the quarterback to see me on every single play? That's what a good zone. So when Tim says that to whatever the number is, that's what it tells me. It tells me that the receiver understands that he's seeing zone. When you think about man coverage is about me beating you. Corner doesn't have to understand 2x2. He doesn't understand a third or a half or a quarter or cloud or sky. It's basketball. It's me versus you. Same thing for a receiver. If it's man, I got to beat him. But if it's zone, right, then I got to make sure. That's what I like about Rutenberg, because Rutenberg is going to show zone more this year, and he's going to play a little bit more zone. However, that receiver going against the Browns is thinking man coverage, and the route tree is completely different versus man versus zone on almost every play in a players overplay offense, right? It's kind of what the air raid is. If you're in zone, I do this. If you're in man, I do this. That's why when you look at, like, I used to look at Mike Leach and he had the little envelope and people were like, how does he call his plays on that? Because it's the same play. It's mesh, right? You're running the play, you're basing on what they do, and everybody's got to be on the same page. So that's what it tells me when you get a guy like Eric Rivers or Zachariah Branch. Now, I do think Rivers is a little bit better vertically than Branch. I don't think he's as good as Branch in space, but you can cut and paste a lot of those things. They're just really good football players. But that's what zone tells me. When guys are good against zone, that's when I went back. It's because, Tim always is really good at like these things that help. That's what it tells me as a coach. So when I'm looking at that number, if I was a head coach again, I would use that number and say, all right, this guy understands football because look at his numbers against zone. That's what it tells me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you had that explanation. I really appreciate that, because for me, I'm never been a coach. I've never played football. I'm way too slow. Even though even though I love talking skill positions, I'm glad you brought that perspective, because for me, beating zone is about, fundamentally understanding what the defense is doing. Is cover 2. It's like, okay, the middle of the field is probably going to be softer. Cover 3, I'm going to have to sit back a little bit and maybe just take what's there, and being patient and, trying to find those islands, trying to avoid the islands and the traffic and give your quarterback a throwing lane. Which, going back to YPRR, we talked about those top 3 receivers I keep talking about: Carnell Tate, Mekhi Lemon, Jordan Tyson. They're all really good against that. They're all really good against zone. They're all in that 2.3 category. And even Omar Cooper Jr., who I would put number 4 there, also good against that. So it feels like as we get into this, we're working through analytics. I think as we start to understand what it's better at helping us identify, I think that's when you can better use it. And I used the baseball analogy before. I remember, I'm going off topic, but I remember a podcast talking about some of the guys the Guardians drafted, that those were guys that typically don't succeed because they don't meet certain profiles. Like, the profile they have typically doesn't work. That doesn't mean you won't have success. That doesn't mean Denzel Boston, who's who's a sub 1.8, like a 1.8 against zone, or Casey Concepcion sub 1.9 and somewhere like that. That doesn't mean those guys aren't going to be successful in the NFL. It just means it's less likely. You can learn how to be better against zone, but something I think for certain guys that may need to be taught. Some guys just have that innate ability to do that.
Tim said something there, Lance. I want you to put your coach hat on for me for a second. You've
All
been
right.
eyeballing us here for the last hour. You've seen us both. If we were coming out to play football for Garfield Heights back in the day, where are you putting us? Like, is Tim too slow to play for you? I don't think he
No,
is.
he's
I think
not.
you
So
can
I'm
find
once again,
spot for him.
I'm a players over plays guy. So Tim is he's all about the numbers. So I'm gonna put Tim Tim, you're an O-line guy, you think? Would that where you'd be? So I'm gonna put him on the O-line or D-line, but I'm gonna put him in situations. He's gonna be my move guy. And in high school, we always had a guy he's got to understand, got to get everybody lined up on his team because he's gonna play with some guys who don't have the GPA he does. So he's gonna be on my line. Dan, I think you're going to be my
kicker.
free. No. I'm going to. Oh man, that would have been that was. First of all, that's why I'm not witty. That's why I'm not good at this because I should have said kicker. No, if you were, I'm going to go. You're very thorough in what you do, so I'm going to go free safety in a one hi hat look, but I'm not going to go with a total man look. I'm going to go. You're going to run some zone. And the reason why is because you're smart enough to understand the coverages in front, the formations you're going to see. So you will see, because of what you do, you will see what groups come out. You will know where to line up your secondary and your linebackers because you're going to be bringing, sim pressures when you play for me. So you're going to be the free safety who kind of runs the show. You'd be usually a linebacker. I would have you kind of as like the green dot guy in the secondary for me.
I like that. All right. See, there we go. So
I got both
like
of you. Listen, I got both of you. You guys are both playing a lot of snaps for me.
All right, Lance, give us your last pick.
All right, so again, I have corners, Mansour Delaney, all those guys, Johnson out of San Diego State. All these guys are really good man zone. One of the things that I have in my breakdown is I have them sticky corners, guys who are best in man coverage. And the guy I have on the top of my list is Avion Terrell from Clemson. I think he's the stickiest corner in this draft. What I mean by that, well, he's sometimes not a great tackler. Sometimes he can be had when Clemson played zone. He's got to learn that. Clemson also does a nice job of playing 2-1 high hats. Their secondary is pretty complex in what they do. But I tell you what, you put the guy in man coverage, me versus you, you limit the thought process because all those things you guys are saying about zone, about a receiver is very similar to a DB. If you are thinking, your feet aren't moving and you're beat. So for me, I would go, I think he's the best man coverage outside one man coverage guy in this year's draft, which is very important for the Cleveland Browns.
Tim, what are your thoughts on this one?
But I think with Terrell, I think he's an interesting guy. Obviously, NFL bloodlines. His older brother is AJ Terrell, former first-round pick. So certainly, I always trust bloodlines. And I think it's interesting with Avion Terrell. I didn't have him in my first round of my latest mock, and I think it's less to do with him. I think it's kind of a whole Clemson thing. Like I wrote about this, I'm probably going to write about this with Peter Woods, the defensive tackle. It feels like that entire Clemson team is sliding in the draft just because they didn't have that good a season this year. I think I expect them to be a national championship contender. I think if we're not talking about, the disappointment Penn State was, I think Clemson's, right there for biggest disappointment, but it's not a thing with AJ Terrell. Avion Terrell. I swear I'm gonna get that confused 1,000 times, but certainly I think he's, he could be a guy that sneaks in the second round, I think, but certainly for the Browns, if they do kind of what they've done the last year, which is in particular, they were more man coverage than everybody else. I think you kind of lean towards what you want to do defensively. And if Terrell does seem like a very good, better man corner than zone, and I think if you feel like you're going to play man much more than most teams, that's kind of where you want to lean, is a guy who, when you go to man, you can have that guy, and if you decide to go to zone, if the guy's not there, good, put in a zone corner. But if you, again, it comes down to how often do you use certain personnel grouping, certain certain players depending on what you're going to run. But, having another man corner is an interesting thought. And certainly Terrell, I think if he's there at 39, then all of a sudden, even with D'Angelo Pond still there, I think you have, if you're going to go corner, you have a pretty tough decision to make.
Dan, I
Okay,
got
let's.
one more thing for you on that, Dan, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah,
You
go
know,
for it.
when you say here's the, I think you said it best, Tim, when you said about he's much better in man and zone, and that's why I'm really excited for this new Rutenberg style defense. Even though I love Schwartz and I was sad he left, Rutenberg can hide that with Terrell a little bit more, right? So he can show zone and then be in man, which is really helpful because when you watch the Browns with Schwartz, there are no tricks. We are in one high hat and we are covering man. He's going to help. Rutenberg will help those guys out. So if you think about a Martin Emerson who's coming back off injury, if you think about, Tyson who's better in man, or maybe you have a guy who's not as good in man, the way you can still play man and help him is to show zone pre-snap and all you got to do is play it once. You only have to play it once because us offensive coordinators are neurotic. So we always say all week then they can play if they're in this look. They can play man or zone, which we know they're probably going to be in man, but we have to work on that. So Rutenberg's going to really help a guy like Terrell if they were to take him because he can help them showing zone pre-snap.
Okay, do you guys, Tim? You have some honorable mentions you want to run through real quick?
Well, not necessarily an honorable mention because I think he's a first round pick, but I've like I said, I mentioned Omar Cooper Jr. earlier talking about YPR versus zone. You know, for me, he's kind of passed up. Denzel Boston, Casey Concepcion. I mean, Indiana doesn't win a national championship if Omar Cooper doesn't make that insane catch against Penn State. I mean, that is one of the most incredible catches you're ever going to see, not just because of the acrobatics of it, but given, the situation of the game, no timeouts, you got to drive 80 plus yards for the win in Happy Valley to avoid the upset to still possibly play for the Big Ten title. And Omar Cooper goes and does that. Solid athlete, but I think, again, with the ability to succeed in zone, I think that's a big check mark in Omar Cooper's column. So I try to stay away from guys who are going to go in the first round. Certainly, I think D'Angelo Pons he's got a chance. I wouldn't put it past him because I think with national championship teams, it feels like you always see those guys off national title teams go earlier than maybe they should. I feel like that's a thing we see all the time. But, Cooper's going in the first round. I wouldn't be shocked if he's top 20. I also wouldn't be shocked if, that the Browns went tackle at 6. They took Francis Maui Noah, or say they take Maui Noah at 6, wait till 24 to get the receiver. And if Cooper's there, I don't hesitate. I'm putting that call in right away for him if I'm Andrew Berry.
Lance, do you have some honorable mentions? Oh, hold on one second.
So I got Sawyer Robinson, awesome player out of Baylor. I think he'll be the quarterback who is undrafted or plays day 3, but will be very good, at least a very good backup, has a lot of tools. Receiver wise, I got Skylar Bell out of UConn. I think he's outstanding, another touch guy. Tight ends wise, I have Michael Trigg. I love Michael Trigg. I think he can run. Trey Zune, the left tackle from Texas A&M. I have him as my number one in the top 3 pure pass protector in this draft. I think he's an awesome pass protector. Sam Height, the center out of Kansas State, tested as bad as you can test. Don't care. His film is really nasty. I think people will pass him up because his tests are so good. But again, another guy that's irritated when he plays. Really, really like him. Mike Washington, the running back out of Arkansas, I love. And then I had a couple defensive linemen that I really, really like. Derek Moore from Michigan, I think, can be outstanding.
This is great. You can probably hear the paper. Lance is just like, he might list like
I'm all over it, right? Papers
guys
are flying. So,
40, 50
you
pages of
be
notes.
careful what you ask, right? And then my last one today is Malachi Lawrence, edge guy from UCF. I think he's got a great future. Guy plays with a great motor. When you said, give me some examples, I get sudden and twitchy, like I like to describe I get a little antsy because I got lots of guys that you've been watching that you fall in love with for sure.
All right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I can't remember who I saw. It might have been Josh Norris and Hayden Winks who did a mock draft. I think they had Malachi Lawrence in the first round. So certainly thinking there. Can I also throw a shout out to Eli Stowers from Vanderbilt?
Yeah.
I mean, the Browns probably won't take him because they have Harold Fanda, but my goodness, Eli Stowers. I mean, this is unbelievable athlete, amazing production. This is a guy who's played tight end for like 3 seasons. He was a former college quarterback and has put up outstanding numbers. Again, I don't know if the Browns would take him just because they have Fandon, but could you imagine considering Todd Monken, we know what he does with tight ends and, Georgia with Brock Bowers and what he had in Baltimore with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and Charlie Kohler. Could you imagine a 1-2 tight end combination of Harold Fan and Eli Stowers? Probably not going to be great blocking, but in passing situations, my goodness.
Okay, let's run through this list one more time. Tim's guys were D'Angelo Pons, cornerback out of Indiana, Ted Hurst, wide receiver from Georgia State, Jagger Burton, offensive lineman out of Kentucky, Bud Clark, safety TCU, and Eric Rivers, wide receiver Georgia Tech. Lance's guys, Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker from Texas Tech, Keylan Rutledge, the offensive lineman from Georgia Tech, Zachariah Branch, wide receiver out of Georgia, Oscar Delp, tight end from Georgia, and Avion Terrell, the cornerback out of Clemson. So there we go. Some names that you can keep in mind as we get really into day 2, day 3 of the draft, which is coming up very quickly. We're going to continue to do these every single week. We will do a big mock draft here at some point. We haven't been doing the mocks in every single one of these. We're going to save it. I'm going to have each of these guys, because all we do is argue when we do the mock draft. So I'm going to have you guys do a dueling mock draft here as we get closer to the draft, which, again, it's only a few weeks away. I'm shocked.
Are we calling that arguing, or are we calling that eyes wide open when Lance makes his picks? Is that what? So we're going to call it arguing? I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, we're trying to be nice to you, Lance.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, that's going to do it for this edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. If you want to watch these podcasts, they are on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Find us on any social you've got. So whether it's Twitter or Instagram, TikTok, Threads, yes, even Threads, Facebook, just go look for Orange and Brown Talk. Give it a like, give it a follow. We've got clips, all sorts of stuff, and we'll be putting up with the offseason program starting. Middle of May, we're going to be out there watching practices, so there'll be clips going up for those, press conference clips, all of that stuff, as well as podcast clips. So just give Orange and Brown Talk a follow on all of your socials. Tim and Lance, I appreciate the time. We will be back, I believe, on Friday. I'll have Mary Kay. We'll kind of recap the owners' meetings a little bit, and then we'll be back to a normal week next week with a Hey MK. We'll do another draft pod, all of that stuff. So, yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.